Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our 4 Milling Matters lectures being held jointly by SPAB Scotland and Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust. I'm Lucy Stewart, Scotland Officer for the Society, and I'm speaking to you from Edinburgh today. Our Milling Matters series has been inspired by our desire to make more of Mills Weekend, which has been run for many years by the SPAB, but never properly been taken on in Scotland. Our monthly lectures this year will lead up to a flagship Scottish Mills Weekend in Perth in May. Lots of details on our website. Now, I know we all miss the jollity and atmosphere of a real lecture theatre, but I can assure you that you're here with well over 40 others. So it's a really good crowd. You just have to imagine them all sitting behind you. We've got people from all over the UK in attendance today. The Isle of Skye, Inverness, Shetland, Peebles, York, London, Otley, Oxford. Our reach is far and wide. We are especially pleased to be joined by guests from New South Wales, Australia, who have family connections to the mill. Welcome all. Now, I am delighted to introduce you to Rognvald Brown, Chair of John O'Groats Mill Trust, which was set up in 2017 following community concerns at the state of the building. Rogny's got a long family history with the mill and worked there when he was younger. I'm sure he will tell us more. He's well placed to give us an intimate history of the family connections to the mill and its owners over the years. Rogny is joined for the second part of the talk by Bryony Robinson, who joined the Trust in 2021 as their development manager. With a background in building conservation, she has over 10 years' experience helping projects realise their full potential. Rogny and Bryony will be joined for the questions and answers by Chris Bowes of McGregor Bowes Architects. Chris is architect for the project and will help answer some of the more technical questions you might have. Please don't be shy. And so, without further ado, I will switch off and hand over to Rogny and Bryony.
Hello everybody, I hope you can all hear me satisfactorily. As you've gathered, I'm Rognvald Brown. I have to own up to having a family connection with the John O'Groats Mill. It was actually built by my great-grandfather, but more of that later. We're in John O'Groats here and we're looking north over the Pentland Firth in this picture, and I'm actually looking out my window over the Pentland Firth, and I can tell you it's a much stormier day today, but we hope it'll calm down eventually. Anyway, everybody will have heard of John O'Groats. Many of you may have visited, but it's way up at the top here. We're at the top tip of the Scottish mainland. Now, the history of this place is rather different to that of further south. If you look at the place names here, it's a dead giveaway. They're all Norse. And in times past, the links were more with the north than the south. The late Gordon Donaldson, who was Professor of Scottish History in Edinburgh University, illustrated this very well in his book, A Northern Commonwealth. And he proposed that Caithness and Orkney were very much the breadbasket for, in effect, a Northern Commonwealth, a huge northern area where travel was more by sea than anything else. And it's against this background that the area developed. The Caithness and Orkney are relatively flat. They've got rich soils. They could grow grain well. And the agricultural economy was built largely around cereal production. And back in the 1700s or earlier, there would have been many mills dotted across the landscape. I have to admit, I've pinched this picture here. These two are of a mill in Huxter in Shetland, and this is the interior of one in Orkney, because we've none left intact in Caithness, unfortunately. There would have been many of this type of Norse click mills. They were tiny, and there wasn't really any development from that until the effects of the Industrial Revolution started to filter up here. So when the John O'Groats Mill was built, there would have been about 20 mills of comparable size operating across the county. These were just the latest evolution in an age-old craft. And here you can see a compilation of pictures of some Caithness mills. I put the best one in the middle, the John O'Groats Mill, and maybe I'm just ever so slightly biased on that. But you can see that they're all substantial big stone buildings. And as I said, there would be about 20 of them, and they were working pretty hard when they were built. There was they basically replaced many smaller mills. And if I take the Thurso mill, for instance, we know that when it was built, it replaced several smaller mills around Thurso. These were a considerable advance in the click mill. So milling was like any other field. Advances were made. They became more efficient. Most of this generation of mills were built in the mid to late 1800s and would be in production around 1870. The Groats mill was relatively late on the scene. It was built, or perhaps rebuilt, in 1901. We think this makes it the last water-driven corn mill to be built in Scotland, probably in the UK. But it wasn't a sudden new kid on the block. The miller, Magnus Houston, was the fourth generation Houston millers. There would be two more after him. And this would be the fourth mill the Houston family would operate on this site. The previous mill building still exists. You can see it in the centre of this picture by John Nicholson. It was built in 1845. And when the new mill was built, on that building to the left of the picture, which was knocked down and rebuilt to make the new mill, the old mill became a threshing mill. And as I say, the building still exists. It in its day replaced this one, which was built in 1818, which in turn replaced an earlier mill. Unfortunately, there's no drawings or plans of this earlier mill. It may well have been a simple click mill. What happened before then is lost in the mist of time. So we know that the first young Houston became a miller in 1750, when his master, he was a miller's apprentice, his master was also a ferryman running a ferry to Orkney, and he was lost on a trip back, perhaps like today, when his boat was swamped on the Pentland Firth. What we can say with certainty is that this site has been used for milling since technology developed beyond the hinterland. The hinterland, as you can see, is fairly flat. And this is the only spot where the slope or fall increases to allow water to become a power source. It was the Norsemen who took that technology here more than 1,000 years ago. So we can say that John O'Groats Mill represents 1,000 years of milling development on this one site. If we think of these times 150 years ago, there were lots of hungry mouths to feed at home, big families. But like other areas, rent was also paid in grain or meal. Both grain and meal were also exported to the big population centres. And there was also a huge fishing industry to be sustained. So these mills were working flat out. But things always change. And the first harbinger of change here in Caithness was the coming of the railway. That was in the mid-1870s. And with this, there came the possibility of sending livestock south to the cities. It was by no means a sudden change, but over the next half century or so, it sealed the fate of almost all of the Caithness mills. By 1930, many of the mills were closing or in trouble. The big Castle Hill mill at Castleton went bankrupt in 1930. It was probably the biggest of all the Caithness mills. By the end of the 1950s, only the John O'Groats Mill was left. We're lucky that the Groats Mill was built at all, in fact. By 1901, steam engines were readily available. Indeed, Wick already had a steam mill. Within another year or two, oil engines were about to make their appearance. But here, we're in a fairly remote community with no harbour to ship in fuel for steam. We could cut peats, but to cut enough peat to run a steam engine would be a phenomenal task. So we also had a family that was new and understood their water mills. So it was built nearer to the town. It would have been regarded as already obsolete. Now it survived, passed from father to son, and unlike some of the mills near the towns, it formed only part of a family business. They also had land to till and livestock to rear. They were also crofters. And in hindsight, this was the key to the mill's survival. And so it carried on. It ground on until 2001, when suddenly and sadly Magnus Houston, the sixth of his line, passed away. And I'm really very lucky that I spent many, many days with him working in the mill. So I suppose I know it fairly well. Now, I should perhaps have, I missed something out here. I should perhaps have said earlier that up here in the top of Scotland, we talk about corn mills, but this far north, wheat won't ripen. It might on a very good summer, but it would be extremely risky. Barley and oats were the main crops grown, and the traditional form of barley in these parts is beer. So oatmeal and beer meal were the produce here, and in recent years, beer meal was the niche product that ensured the mill's survival. Now, since 2001, the mill has stood silent. So we've done basic maintenance. We've kept the wind and water out as much as we possibly could. And the wheel and the machinery are still in good working order. But like most buildings, it needs a little TLC. As you can imagine, drawing a line under 6 generations of history is a hard thing to do. It took a few years for a new chapter in the mill's history to become apparent. The mill was always a focal point in the community, a place where people would meet. All the more so because Magnus was a character, a raconteur, and a mine of knowledge of local history and of agricultural practice. The question was repeatedly pondered over these years, what's going to happen to the mill? After some years and false starts, a community trust was set up. This was the result of a considerable amount of grassroots pressure and enthusiasm. By January 2017, this was formalised. Now, I have to say that naivety has its advantages at times, and I think it's fair to say that nobody had any conception of the long road ahead. But we did make some progress. What followed was a long, extensive journey of community meetings, open days, surveys, consultations on options, continual reviews and revisions, discussions with a huge number of agencies, basically anyone who would listen to us. It was hard work at times, but along the way, we met a lot of folk whose expertise was willingly given. We had to clearly define what folk wanted and needed the mill to do, and ensure we could show that our ambitions, when established, would be sustainable. Above all, folk wanted their mill still to be a mill, but it also had to be a focal point in the community, a place where folk could meet, engage in whatever activities they were interested in, be that heritage-based or educational, craft, or just purely social. A blather. The mill had to be an asset for all, young and old. So our mill is going to be busier than it ever was before. And we've still a way to go. Now, as anybody who's been involved in anything like this will I'm sure agree, when you apply for funds, organisations are very, very careful to apply due diligence. And at times this can feel quite daunting, but it certainly ensures you've done your homework and you've questioned your thinking. To cut a long story short, with the not inconsiderable support of a good number of organisations, eventually, despite COVID, on the 17th of August 2020, the John O'Groats Mill Trust became owner of the mill and its surrounds. We'll be forever indebted to the Scottish Land Fund, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, Highland Leader, the Agricultural Heritage Fund, Foundation of Scotland, the North Highland Initiative, HIE and others. Without their support and encouragement, our plans would have withered on the vine. Now, from the outside, it's a plain, unadorned shape. The mill reflects the landscape. We're in the north here. It's built of the local red sandstone with a Caithness slate roof. There was little in the way of decoration. It was a plain, honest shape. It's got an overshot wheel, 12 feet diameter and 4 feet wide. And anybody will tell you who knows about water wheels that the overshot wheel was by far the most efficient, if you could get enough fall. It takes its water from the Duncansby burn. It was built entirely by local craftsmen. The mason and foreman joiner came from within a mile or two of here, both still renowned long after their day for excellent workmanship. The castings were supplied by Bruce's foundry in Wick, the nearest town, 17 miles to the south. And the millwrights were Miller by name, and their descendants are still to be found in Wick too. But let's have a look in our mill. Inside, it's unchanged since its construction in 1901. For folk that are knowledgeable about mills, they'll see a lot that's familiar. For others, it can be a bit confusing, as the milling process takes us up and down through 3 floors. And I was always told as a youngster that to be a miller you needed good knees, as you were forever going up and down these stairs. The power of the wheel is transferred into the building through the gear cupboard. Now this is looking in through the door of the gear cupboard, and we're looking down into what's commonly called the pit. And in here you see the pit wheel. It's on the same shaft or axle as the mill wheel outside. And it goes or revolves at about 10 revs per minute. The pit wheel in turn turns a smaller bevel pinion, which you see right in the centre of the picture. It's called the wallower, and it gears up by a factor of 4. Higher up on the same vertical shaft as the wallower, you've got the huge spur wheel. It has got wooden teeth, which run more quietly, but they can also be replaced if worn. Now this spur wheel turns the 3 smaller gear wheels, and you can see one of them to the left of the picture. And these are attached to the millstones on the next floor. And indeed, you can see the bottom of one of the sets of millstones in the top of the picture there. They also gear things up by a factor of 4. And if you look, each little gear wheel is on a jacking arrangement, so it can be made to be in gear with the spur wheel, or you can screw it up so that it's out of gear. So any of the 3 sets of millstones can be in gear or out of gear at any one time. You would never have more than one set in operation at any one time. Again, the gearing, as I said, was up by a factor of 4. So if the wheel is turning at 10 RPM, the millstones are turning at 160 RPM. Now upstairs, above that, on the first floor, you can see the 3 sets of grindstones. There's one in the back there, which is maybe less obvious, but there's 3 there. But we'll come back to them later. Now, in the mill's heyday, people would come to the mill with oats or beer for grinding. This was already threshed. It would be brought it could be bought by the miller, or perhaps just ground for the customer. Now the miller, particularly if he was buying the grain, had to be sure of the quality. And for this, the grain was measured in weight per volume, and a bushel measure was used. And like all measuring devices, it had to be certified by the local weights and measures authority. History is full of stories of millers giving short measure. This is the mill's bushel measure, and it's duly stamped with the Caithness cockerel and the year. It's 69, but that's 1869. Now, a bushel of oats would weigh around 3 stone, and barley heavier, near 4 stone. And obviously, the heavier the weight, the better would be the quality. But before it could be ground, the grain had to be dried, and the moisture content would have to be taken down from perhaps 20% down to about 8 or 9. Now, the bags of corn were lifted up to the top floor using a chain hoist. And that's fairly common to all water mills. Then the corn would be spread evenly over the perforated cast iron floor of the kiln. The kiln would take about a ton at a time, and to dry beer would take about 4 hours. Down on the ground floor, the kiln fire would be lit, and a fairly slow smouldering fire would be maintained. Too hot, and you'd scorch the grain, and you didn't want to cook it. And when dried, the grain was swept off the floor into these two wooden bins that you can see in this picture. It was bagged again and taken up the chain hoist again, but this time it was ready for grinding. Now, grinding is a two-stage process. The first stage is called shelling. The grain is passed through the shelling stones. Now, they're in this in the center of this picture here. The local name for the casing is called the crub. Anyway, the stone, they're light stones. They're made of sandstone, and in our mill, they actually come from the cliffs of Dunnet Head, the most northerly headland in the Scottish mainland. The shelling takes the husk off the kernel, and after it passes through the millstones, it drops down onto a wire cloth riddle. Now the husk and kernel falls over the end of the riddle into a fanner or winnowing machine, and the heavy kernel drops down to be picked up by this elevator belt. The lighter husk gets blown away into a separate storage compartment, the husk house. Now the husk, or sids as it's called locally, is of no food value, but is used as fuel for the kiln fire. The kernel is carried back up to the top of the mill in the elevator belt. And you can see the top of it in this picture. Usually the grain would be passed through the shelling stone a second time, in fact, with the stones set a little tighter to make sure the smaller grains were also clean enough for grinding. This complicated structure at the top of the mill gives the miller a choice about where the shelled grain could be deposited as it comes off the elevator. The bags here are ready to collect the hulled or shelled grain for processing the next day. Now, unlike its predecessor, this mill has 3 sets of stones. For shelling, another for oatmeal, and a third for beer meal. The grindstones, that's the oatmeal stones and the beer meal stones, are much heavier than the shelling stones. As in this mill, the oatmeal stones are called Derby Peaks, which tells you exactly where they were imported from. The beer meal stones are made of granite. The top stone here came from Courtenay, which is about 50 miles west of here along the north coast. The grain was fed into the eye of the stone by way of a shoe, which you can see in this picture here. The shoe was made to dance or vibrate, shaking the grain down evenly. And appropriately enough, the cam arrangements, which you can see in the center of the picture there, which made the shoe dance, was called the dancel. Now, this picture looks terribly still, but remember that the top stone would be revolving at 160 revs per minute, give or take. The bedstone is stationary, and the skill of the miller is the key to getting the meal just right. Stones should never touch one another. They damage each other very, very quickly. But too big a gap and the meal would be too coarse. Too fine would be very slow to grind, but you would also risk the stones making contact with one another and getting stone grit in the meal. The stones weren't smooth, though they did wear with time. Every now and again, the top stone had to be lifted off and turned over and dressed. Now, I put this picture in just to prove to my friends that I wasn't always grey-haired. This is a few years ago when we were dressing the beer meal stones. But for today, we'll put everything back together, I think. Now, assuming the stones are running and set correctly, we'll go downstairs and see where the meal comes out. Now, this is immediately below the beer meal stones. The meal drops down a chute, which is in the center back of the picture, and lands in this sifter. Now, you'll notice that the sifter doesn't have a screen in it. The screen is down on the left-hand side of the picture. It's a wire cloth, very, very fine brass wire cloth screen. And that will be slid into that wooden box arrangement when the mill was in use. It was never left there, but was always removed after each milling and would be swept down. Milling, in a miller's life, cleanliness was really next to godliness. Anyway, let's assume that it's working away there. And after we've got that, all we've got to do is weigh it and bag it. And here's Magnus, the last miller, where he liked to be, having milled yet another bag of bare meal. And here's the genuine article. A few pounds of the meal were kept from the last time the mill was used. And they've been stored carefully so that when the mill restarts, we will be able to make sure that the new meal matches the old. Now, I have to apologise because this is very much a whistle-stop tour of the mill and its workings. I've always been criticised for blathering on too long. I apologise if I've missed out anything critical, but you can always ask questions at the end. Now, as you can see, it's a building to be cherished. We certainly cherish it. And it should be kept in working order. For our community, it's got a whole lot of potential. There's lots of space. Grinding in the future will be on a small scale, so that all that space formerly used for storing bags of grain will be available for a wide range of uses to benefit the community and also its visitors. Now that's a little bit of history and a little bit of a look back to how we got where we are today. But if you look at my grey hair, I'm better looking at back than looking forward. So now I'm going to ask Bryony here to look forward into the future. Bryony, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Rodney. That was a great introduction to the mill. So my name's Bryony Robinson and my role here is the development manager for the Trust. I started in the role last year. And it's my job to kind of oversee and project manage the transition of the mill from an unused building into a community venue and a heritage visitor attraction. I have worked in conservation all over Scotland, in Glasgow, Paisley and elsewhere in the Highlands, but I'm actually originally from here and I went to the local primary school, so I saw the mill every day on my school bus route. And yeah, I'm really delighted to have been able to come back home and be in this role to help the mill and the Trust realise their ambitions. The first steps really in bringing an unused mill like this back into use is to identify funders. And the whole project, as Rodney alluded to earlier, it takes a few years to the Trust itself is a charity, so to get the money together, to come up with the right plans and to see that through to fruition, it takes a few years and quite a lot of money. So this is my role and is what we are doing at the moment. And along the way, we are trying to engage with the community and allow people to have little insights into the mill. The mill itself is very unusual in still having all its internal machinery intact. So it's really well placed to become a heritage visitor attraction where people can understand the mill's role in the community, how the milling process worked. We are engaging with a lot of funders across the UK, national bodies and local funders, to try and put together a package of funding. And the aim of the works we will be carrying out is to retain the existing mill building as it is, as much as possible. It is a B-listed building and we are really taking a conservation approach to any repair works. As Ronnie said, the mill building is actually in a relatively good condition because it has been maintained and kept wind and watertight over the last few years, even when it's not been in use. So for the main mill building, the aim is to repair as is, to retain as much as possible of what's there, and any new materials that are needed will match the old. Now, in order to retain the mill building as it is, we're going to build a new extension onto the back, which will house any new facilities that are needed, such as toilets and a small kitchen area. And that'll also be a small room which will be useful for the community to use, especially in the winter months. It'll be easy to heat. That is the rear of the mill, and this is where the new extension will be built on, and it'll be built into the landscape to try and be as unobtrusive as possible. These are some renders that our architect Chris has put together. The design has changed slightly from here, and we're still going through a refinement process, but this gives you an idea of where the extension will be on the north side of the mill, looking towards the sea, and it fits into the landscape, so it won't be any higher than the existing fields to the east of the mill, and it will have a green roof so that it's as unobtrusive as possible. It will also have lovely views outside, down the burn and to the sea. Here is another angle of that extension. Here are some plans, just so you can see how we are proposing to build the extension. The stairs to the left are necessary, or to the left on this plan, are necessary as fire escape. We've actually refined that version of the stairs to minimise the impact. Here you can see on the right hand side the floor plan, the ground floor plan of the mill. The kiln is an L-shaped building. Most of the mill building itself will become the heritage visitor attraction and a reception area, and you can walk through the reception area into the new extension on the left. This is the first floor, and you can see the green roof on the left. And here are a few of the activities we have been up to over the last year. So we opened up on Doors Open Day, and alongside the works of the mill, the Trust is very interested as well in engaging with the community, providing opportunities for people to learn and visit the mill, and also to make other repair work and improvements along the way. So on the bottom left-hand side, you can see the local biodiversity group visiting our mill pond area. And our mill pond is the water source for the mill. So we'll need to clean and tidy that up in order to have the water source powering the mill in the near future. We're currently going through various surveys to inform the detailed design, and we have been funded by the Architectural Heritage Fund and the Heritage Lottery Fund to enable us to do that over the next few months. And the middle top picture here, you can see a new coastal path that has been put in, and it's an all abilities pedestrian, cycling, wheelchair accessible path that links the John O'Groats Harbour, which is the main tourist spot in John O'Groats, with the mill itself, which is great right now for tourists and locals alike as an extra walking area, but it's also a non-vehicular way for people to access the mill in the future when it is going to be open as a heritage attraction. So we're trying to build in sustainability, all types of sustainability, to the uses of the mill and to the approaches to the mill as we go along. And that's really just a very short description of what we're doing and what the Trust's doing, but I'm more than happy to take any further questions on the mill or our plans or the history of it. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. That was a brilliant little run through of the mill and how it works. Particularly fascinating to see, you know, the exact sequencing of everything that was going on. Really nice to have that sort of introduction, because you know, mills are such unique buildings. It's really nice to have that experience of the run through of how it all works. Now, audience members, this is your opportunity to pop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I will start off with a little question myself whilst you all think about what you're going to ask. Right at the very beginning, Rodney, and forgive me for my ignorance on this, you mentioned click mills. can you elaborate just a little bit more on why they're called click and what makes them particularly different from any other sort of mill?
Well, the Norsemen took their milling technology here back, and they arrived here about 1100 years ago, roughly, and they had a type of mill which is not unique to Scandinavia. You'll find it in lots of parts of the world. It was basically a horizontal paddle wheel which was placed in the side of the burn, and it was basically a wooden shaft with flat blades stuck into it, and that rotated with the stream hitting it. Now that wooden shaft went up into the bottom of a little hut, stone hut basically, and at the top end of that wooden shaft was a millstone. So when the bottom millstone had a hole in it, the top and the shaft went up through that. The top stone was attached to that shaft. So the paddle wheel, horizontal paddle wheel in the side of the burn would actually turn the millstone. It wasn't very big. It would only maybe be about 3 feet diameter, roughly. It was like one step up from the hand quern that people would use before those. Now it's called a click mill because above the millstone there was a hopper which fed the grain into the eye of the top stone, and there was a wooden peg fitted in the top stone which rotated round, and every time it rounded it gave the hopper a clatter, if you like, and that made a noise. It would click, 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 and each click shook a little more grain down, so hence the term click mill. So I think maybe that answers the question.
Right, I see. Okay, so it's to do with the noise that it was making, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Now I'm going to invite Chris Bowes, who is the architect for your project, to join us as one of the panelists, and hopefully he will pop into the view very shortly. We've got quite a little list of questions. First off, from Alex Green, who asks, when the mill was rebuilt in 1901, is it known where the machinery was manufactured and supplied from? You mentioned that some pieces were cast in Wick, but were there other bits of machinery that came from other parts of the country?
I don't know all the answers. I know some of the answers. Some of the machinery is older than the mill itself because it came from the if you like, the Mark III mill before it, and was transferred over. Some of it was cast in Wick. Some of it was manufactured locally, but I suspect by 1900 that some was imported from the industrial centres further south. The gantry, if you like, the jacking arrangements below the stones, I suspect, but I don't know, were imported. But that's about as much as I know. What I do know is that there's quite a lot of documents still to be investigated, and some of these are in the Scottish Archive, and these describe a long journey of acquisition and choosing of equipment, which went on during there was a series of letters between the miller and his nephew, who was an engineer in the south of Scotland, and they wrote back and forth discussing various options for the mill. So I suspect there's some information to be discovered in there, but as yet I haven't investigated it all.
There were some elements, weren't there, Rognvald, that were definitely reused from older mills in the mill. So, for example, there's a gurnal on the top floor used for storing grain, and you can see on that in pencil records going back to, what was the first year on the gurnal?
1885, roughly.
So this mill was only built in 1901, but on the gurnal, the miller has recorded the amount of grain every year in pencil, and there's lines from every year, and it starts in 1888. So we know that that gurnal has been reused from an earlier mill, because the records on it start earlier than this building itself.
I can also add that it was the millers, the Houstons were tenants of the mill at that time, and I don't know about the negotiations between the local estate and the building of the mill, but I do know that Houstons financed the machinery, at least, perhaps more, of the building of this new mill. And they weren't wealthy people, they were crofters come millers. So it was a case of using what you could get your hands on, basically. Yeah. A lot of equipment was reused. The bare millstone, which was in the picture there, the top stone came from Curtamy, and as far as I know, it was new. But the stone underneath it was robbed from a local mill that was no longer in use. I say robbed; it would go with the permission of the estate.
Sharing of parts.
Yes, so it was a case of it had to. Cost was always an issue, and even despite that, it would have been a huge undertaking, I would imagine, at that time.
Yeah. Well, and if something already exists and is in sound order, why not reuse it if nobody else wants to? So.
Indeed.
Indeed. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us. I've got a little question for you here. You might have seen it in the chat, to do with the new lift.
Yeah.
Installed.
Yeah.
How Steve is asking, how is its site chosen, and will there be any impact on the old mill fabric, or have you managed to find a neat route through the existing building?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Steve. It's a bit of a balance, really. The entrance to the mill will now be in the knuckle of the L at that angle, and where the lift is located is in that area, and that offers the best access to the mill and the extension as well. It does mean that there's parts of the floor and parts of one of the hopper which we won't be able to, we'll have to dismantle, but anything that we are taking away, we're hoping to reuse. There is scope to reuse some of the timbers in other areas for some of the additions. So we'll try and retain as much fabric as possible. We did look at the relocating or placing the mill, the lift rather, at the back of the mill, but one of the issues there is when you get to the top of the building, the junction between the eaves and the wall would mean we'd have to build into the roof, and because there isn't the headroom there for a lift entrance. Locating it elsewhere, I mean, locating in the front would be an issue, because some of the reason behind all the extension at the back is that the visual impact of anything that's new is minimised, and that's partly because the mill is so prominent in the landscape in the historic environment of Scotland. We're keen that we didn't do anything that lessens that impact. So anything in the front or anything to the sides is more problematic. Anything to the north at the back would be possible. So having reviewed all this, the lift was really or the location of the lift was really, as I say, a bit of a balance out of what would suit the requirements to have a fully accessible building, but minimise visual impact, but also fabric impact to the building. So I think it's the best solution for what was required.
It is difficult, isn't it, finding that spot that you can put these vital things in.
Yeah.
Between the balance of how keeping the external shape looking as it should do, not interfering too much inside, making it practical for the use that you're trying to do. It's not always straightforward.
No, that's and that's part of the whole ethos for the project is really trying to minimise any changes to the existing mill building, and that's why the extension really is being built, because most of the new facilities can be housed within that and retain the existing mill as much as possible. A lift has to go in for access, so it has been looked at in the round about where would cause the least intrusion and the least loss of important fabric, as well as being practical at actually giving access. But other than the lift I would say is the main intervention into the mill. There will be an opening of a window on the ground floor. It will become a door so that you can access into the new extension, and there are small changes for health and safety reasons, but really the lift is the main difference to the existing building. Other than that, we are trying to retain it as it is.
Thank you. Now I've got quite a lot of milling questions for you all. I think these will all be going for Rognvald in the end. So one to start off with, where will the grain come from for the new milling? Have you got a local supplier sorted out, or what's the approach going to be for that?
The milling, if you wanted to set up the John O'Groats mill as a mill, a commercial mill, nowadays I think it would be a quick way to bankruptcy. The milling will be on a relatively small scale, so we won't be in the business of competing with any other businesses, if you like. The beer will be grown locally. We have, as well as the mill, we have nearly 10 acres of ground with the mill, which we can use, or some of that we can use for a growing crop if required.
Oh, right.
We
so
can
you can
also
grow your own.
we can also acquire grain from other sources as well. So it would all be local produce, certainly.
Super.
And obviously it's oats or beer that was the traditional crop, so that's what we would like to stick to.
And just to clarify, could you repeat the local name for the beer husks?
SIDS.
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 Okay.
I called it the husk house, but that's really just so that people knew what it was. In practice, we called it the SID house.
Right. And another one related to this grain questions. Are you going to be selling bread flour from the mill? And what sort of grade of flour are you hoping to produce eventually?
We would. The product would be bare meal, and that photograph on the slide was actual bare meal that was left over because after Magnus died, the last batch of meal was still in the mill, and after it was weighed and bagged up, there was a few pounds left. So basically, we've kept it in a deep freeze since then,
right?
Hoping that it would be of value later down the line. And now, I mean, you could use it, but I suspect it's lost some of its flavour. But basically, it's like a whole meal flour, if you like.
It'll give you a nice textural reference, so that you know.
Yes.
That you've got your stone aligned.
It was used in to make beer bread and beer bannocks in this part of the world. And Magnus used to export a lot of meal up to Shetland, over to the Western Isles, as well as to areas around the north of Scotland. Because these were all areas which at one time were familiar with beer meal products. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think you've done very well on that. I'm just scanning down the extensive list of questions. Gosh, you audience, you're doing brilliantly at this. I'm going to start at the top. One for Bryony. How long is the path to the harbour, and how many visitors are projected to come to the mill each year? Now, connected to this one, that somebody else was saying about the North Coast 500 and how many people are going to be passing in a car. you've got a car park. How does that work? So 2 transport questions for you.
Yeah, so the North Coast 500 has been immensely popular up here and has definitely brought an increase in visitors to the area. John O'Groats itself has always been a tourist spot, of course, because of John O'Groats to Land's End. But the North Coast 500 has kind of widened the tourist area. Not without its issues. There's been a bit of an influx of visitors and maybe not enough infrastructure, so we're trying to sort of catch up with that. So the idea is to have a car park here at the mill. As Rognvald said, the Mill Trust also owns surrounding fields, so the car park will be built in an adjacent field to the mill. We'll try and minimise the impact of that on the landscape. So by using certain materials, by working out exactly where the entrance is and where buses might park or cars might park. So it's been looked at carefully to minimise the impact. There isn't really a way of getting around not having one at all. To make it properly accessible, you do need a car park, and especially for the community in the winter, if they're using it as a venue, there will be people who will need to be driven, elderly or access issues, driven quite close to it to be able to get out. So there has to be some form of parking to make it really usable. But yes, the path has been an excellent addition, because a lot of people arrive at John O'Groats by bike or on the ferry from Orkney. A pedestrian ferry runs from Orkney to John O'Groats Harbour. It gives it access without using a vehicle. So we're really going to try and encourage that. Encourage that there. Sorry, was there another part to the question?
How long is the path?
Oh, how do you know how long it is?
About 900 metres, roughly, just short of a kilometre.
Okay, so it's so that's pretty easy walk then between the 2 places.
Yeah. It's flat. It's the surface that's been used for the path is deliberately all abilities. So you can take a wheelchair on it, you can take a bike on it, you can take a pushchair on it, and it just widens the approach, allows people to arrive here by non-vehicular ways. It's also just a great asset in the community. Here we've got a lot of sort of small roads, but not pavements, because it's a rural community. So it's actually all year round provides somewhere that local people can go for a run or go for a walk with their dog. So it's fulfilling a dual purpose, really.
Can I jump
in? Along the shore.
Yes.
Sorry.
Just on the car park, we're intending to install a reinforced grass surface to the car park, so the visual impact with it's not going to be on tarmac. The visual impact is going to be lessened, and tie in with the rest of the landscape roundabout. And
Chris, just whilst we've got you speaking, I spotted another question for you, which was, yes, somebody visited the mill a little while ago and was disappointed that access to the water wheel was quite difficult, and we're wondering whether there's any improvement in access to the water wheel as part of the project. Is there going to be a way of viewing it, or is that something that can be incorporated?
It's tricky because the slope down to the burn is quite steep. I mean, you can get down to the water wheel, but we really haven't seen that as being part of what was required. I'll maybe defer that to Rognvald and Bryony, see if they've any views on it.
The water wheel it's in a housing, and that's how it was built traditionally. Right. So we're not going to suddenly take the housing away to expose the water wheel, because that's not the way. It wasn't an exposed wheel from when it was built. So yes, you can't see a lot of the wheel from outside, but that's the way the building was built, and we're not going to suddenly change that just for accessibility. However, one idea we have had, which we've not implemented yet or sort of gone further, but one idea is to possibly have some kind of camera within the wheelhouse that you could feed into the main mill building so that people could see it turning and see it that way. So we haven't sort of bottomed out exactly how that might work, but I think that would be a way of allowing people to see the wheel itself a little bit better. I think
that would be a lovely idea, because seeing the wheel spinning is the noise and everything is the mesmerising bit of the whole process. Really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Water.
as well.
Right, let's whiz through some more questions. A quick, short one. Did Caithness have walk mills?
No. I'm almost certain of saying, I don't think, I can't be just dogmatic about that, but there were wool mills, tweed mills. I don't know anything about them. It's not something I've investigated, but they certainly weren't many. But there was certainly textiles of one sort or another woven here at one time. You can see that by the names.
Somebody's just popped into the answers that there was a walk mill in Wick on the Telford Lade. So thank you for that.
There you are.
Now, a little bit more perhaps about the community uses for the mill for annual events, and what sort of things you think that the space is going to end up being used for. Well,
it's basically a very flexible space, and it's going to have a very much a seasonal changing use. And in the summertime or the tourist season here, which you can say is basically the 6 months over the summer, so there are people here all year round, the focus will be very much on that. And it'll be about the mill, it'll be, but the top floor in particular is a huge space which lends itself wide open to exhibitions of a whole variety of sorts. But it also lends itself to use as a venue for everything from, well, I can imagine a very good Burns night on the top floor. But it lends itself to I don't like the term men's shed because it automatically excludes 50% of the population. But the idea behind men's sheds is very, very valid, I think. And we've had lots of people asking, could they do this? Could they do that? Could they do the next thing in the mill? And the answer is yes, provided you're not making holes in floors, and provided you're not altering the structure. It's perfectly feasible to do that. One person asked, would it be feasible to set up a loom in it? And the answer is yes. It's a community space, or series of community spaces to use as the community would wish. And it is not for me or anybody else to dictate and say that no, they can't do that. Obviously, things have to be safe, but with that proviso, there is no restrictions on its use.
And
it's basically up to your imagination.
Two quick connected questions. Are you proposing to charge visitors, and what sort of visitor numbers, are you projecting? The background to this question is somebody's asking about business case, and to what extent will the future upkeep be covered by income like that? Perhaps that's something for you to focus on.
Do you want to?
Sure. So a business plan, feasibility study and business plan was carried out at the outset of the project a couple of years ago, and we're constantly updating that business plan as we go further forward in the project. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes to all sorts of things, construction costs, funding avenues over the last couple of years. The income for the trust going forward. So right now we're in this kind of project phase of getting the funding to carry out these works and time to reopen the building, essentially. Then it'll be an ongoing business for the trust to run as a heritage visitor attraction and a venue. So the income will come, yes, there will be a a charge to come in and visit the mill as a heritage visitor attraction. So there'll be ticketed income, there will be a small retail area, there will be venue hire, although we are very cognizant of keeping the venue hire for the community at a very low rate, so it is usable and useful. The trust, as well as acquiring adjacent land and the mill pond and the channels that feed the mill and the mill itself, also took over. There are 2 other buildings within the complex beside the mill, and they are, one of them is the older mill that we saw in some of the pictures during the lecture, and another is the stables, and they were turned into holiday cottages over 20 years ago, around about 20 years ago, I think, by the previous miller, and so the trust now owns them as well. So they will be bringing in income for the trust, because it is quite a hard balance only to run it through ticket sales and venue hire. So that really makes it more sustainable, having a couple of holiday cottages on the complex as well. As I said, the business plan will be constantly updated as we go further forward. But at the moment, I can't think off the top of my head of the visitor numbers. We have it within the business plan. At the moment, that's only been increasing through the North Coast 500. And obviously, we have the tourists that come to John O'Groats to tap into that market. And there are a lot. One of the aims of the mill is to help the John O'Groats area in terms of the amount of time that tourists dwell in the area, because a lot of people come up, take a photo at the sign and leave again. So sometimes there's not enough impact on the smaller businesses in the area, and there's not a lot of wet weather attractions here, or attractions that take a little bit longer. So we're hoping that the mill will sort of work in a symbiotic relationship with the tourist attraction of John O'Groats itself, and just kind of widen the interest for tourists here. There'll be a little bit more to do, and have a knock-on effect to the local cafes, shops and businesses here as well.
When you think of numbers, the numbers coming to John O'Groats can be quite high, and in any day in the middle of summer, you will find that there are literally hundreds of people down at the harbour area. Not many of them stay around to sample the rest of the wonders of John O'Groats, and I'm very biased on that one. And it would not be unreasonable to say that in the month of August you could have 100 people a day visiting the mill. Well, 100 people over the 30 days, that's 3,000 for starters. So you could easily end up in certainly between 5,000 and 10,000 people in a year, maybe more, visiting the mill. So the numbers are quite substantial.
And it's one of the, sorry, I was just going to say, heritage visitor attractions, it's one of the things that the regional and local organisations such as Southern Islands Enterprise and North Island Initiative are trying to encourage and further, because Caithness does have a lot of history and heritage, which hasn't maybe been on the map for tourism as much as other places. So it's certainly, we're hoping that again the mill adds to the kind of heritage tourism within the area.
Now, a question from Historic Environment Scotland asking about opportunities for training people within the project. Is that something that's built into your funding scheme at the minute?
Yeah.
Are you going to have people who are working on the conservation of the building, or perhaps training to be a millwright, or other sorts of training apprenticeship schemes that you're going to be part of? Absolutely.
Absolutely. This is something we're extremely keen on and would want to build in basically wherever we can. So we're currently putting together our activity plan. So our activity plan will be all sorts of opportunities, learning, engagement opportunities linked to the history and heritage of the mill that we will deliver during the capital works phase. We also carry on some of these activities at the moment as well. We've been doing a local logo competition with schools and the biodiversity project at the mill pond, etc. But yes, training and learning about traditional building skills as well as craft skills in terms of the mill are something we're looking at how to deliver right now. So if anyone has any good ideas on that, certainly things that we will be including will be, we would ask for community benefits as part of the works contract. So we would be asking for any contractor taking on a project of this size to include potentially an apprenticeship, allowing a local person to experience traditional building and things. We can put on taster sessions, trying out stonemasonry or slate roofing or informational sessions. So we'll be working that type of thing into our activity plan. And in terms of passing on mill skills, it's certainly something we're very keen. Obviously, Rogny's got first-hand experience, and it's very valuable. Exactly how we do that, we're looking at right now. Exactly how we sort of fund that and what format it would take. But absolutely, I would say all of these types of skills are something we're extremely keen to involve in our project.
Great news. Well, you should, I hope, get in touch with the SPAB Mills section, because we have an apprenticeship scheme for young millers. So that should be on your list of things to make a connection with. And just as a sort of connected question, somebody's saying, thank you both for your presentation. Really interesting to hear about the family milling history. But can you tell us a bit more about the project programme? How does this look for the years ahead? What's your, just a very brief overview of your timescale? When are you going to dig the first sod out of the ground? When are you opening the doors?
So our timeline is very much predicated on the funding timelines. So for a project like this, it takes a couple of years at least to put together the full funding package to enable us to start works on site. And it's kind of taking little steps forward at a time. So you have to get a little bit of funding to enable someone like me to kind of come on and project manage, to enable someone like Chris and a design team to be appointed, to move your outline plans forward, and then you need to get a bit more funding to be able to go on and develop the plans and do consultation. You then need to get the funding to carry out the actual work. So there's a lot of stages to it. And along the way, especially for the national funders, the funding application processes can be 2 or 3 stages of funding application. So you've got your development phases and your delivery phases, and you know, each assessment of your application can take up to 6 months. You also might take up to 6 months to get all the documents together for that application, depending on what they are. So there's an awful lot of work, an awful lot of stages just involved really in getting to the point where you can start on site. So where we are right now is we're in the middle of the development stage. Our kind of outline development has already taken place. So we've got our outline designs and our plans, and we're going through the detailed development stage right now, where we are applying to funders for the delivery of the project. We have been lucky enough to get some funding, as I mentioned in a talk, to carry on through the detailed designs. We've appointed the design team. This month we've been moving forward with a lot of surveys of the building, from rock surveys to asbestos surveys, etc. All the things that we need to inform the detailed design before we can go out to tender. It really depends on how successful we are at each stage of the various funders, because it's not just one funder. We will need to go to a lot of funders to make up the full funding package. And at any one stage, if we are not successful, it might knock us back another 6 months. So we reapply to other funders, etc. But so best case scenario, and all going well, we would be looking at going out to tender potentially at the end of this year or the very start of next year. And then being on site in 2023 and opening as a heritage attraction in 2024. And I leave that loosely because at the moment it'd be impossible to tie down to months, because it is all dependent on all of the funders and all of the applications.
And very, very broadly speaking, I know this is an impossible question for the architect to answer, but what sort of money are we talking for contract sum?
Well, we're talking about at the moment 2.1 million. That's for both parts. That's the restoration and the extension. Okay.
And are you imagining they would be run by the same contractor?
Ideally, yeah. I mean, I think we would try and use a traditional contract and have one contractor and have both parts running simultaneously. I think we have talked in the past about potential phasing, because it seems like it would be possible to uncouple the existing part and the new part, but there's definitely advantages in running both together. But whenever we choose a contractor, it would have to be, especially with the traditional skills, it would have to be someone who's got sufficient experience in that and can demonstrate that.
Yeah. Right. Well, we'll watch it all with great interest.
So yeah, I was just going to say that the pricing of the project, again, it's been such a bit of a crazy year with changes in construction costs that
very difficult.
Yeah, it's something we're kind of. It's difficult, yeah, and we're watching it, and we've yet to go through the detailed design. So, yeah, hopefully by the end of this year we'll have a bit of a better cost estimate, a pre-tender cost estimate to go through. But yeah, it's been an interesting time to be planning a construction project, that's for sure.
Now, two environmental questions. We've got Fraser here who works at Preston Mill in East Lothian, and he says that they've got a lot of trouble with regular flooding and other environmental issues. Is that an issue for you and on your burn? And somebody else is saying, have you given any consideration to the Hill Dam and the overall condition of the burn? Obviously water supply is critical to the whole success of everything.
Okay, yeah. Can I? Well, the Dungasby burn, in the winter time you do get spates, and the burn will be carry a lot of water. It doesn't affect the mill greatly, and it doesn't affect the mill pond greatly. There's a sluice gate on the burn on the pond which you would leave open in times like that anyway. So it doesn't really affect the burn, and it certainly won't affect the buildings as it were. They're not going to get flooded. Originally, when the mill was built, and the earlier mills were running, there was two dams on the Dungasby burn. There was the mill pond, which is a fairly small reservoir, if you would like to call it that, and up on the moorland above John O'Groats there was what's commonly known, locally known as the Hill Dam. Now the Hill Dam was much bigger, and they had a stone built dam wall, if you like, at one end, and that was breached a good number of years ago because the millers in the miller's father's day, because it was no longer being used, and he was concerned about liability, so he had the dam open, so it hasn't filled with water since I was a boy, which is a long time ago. To reinstate that would be horrendously difficult and expensive for a number of reasons. You've had the actual construction costs, but there is huge legislation to do with reservoirs, and its size would bring it into that legislation. So it would cost millions, I would imagine, to do that. So then the plan is not to reintroduce the Hill Dam. I don't think it's necessary anyway, unless you're going to use the mill as it was about when it was built. You wouldn't require that much.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need to be so careful with the water supply.
Right.
The reason for the dam was that the Dungasby burn has a limited catchment area, so it tended to be a spate burn, if you like. So when there was a lot of water, you stored it. But in fact, the mill pond will be able to will have enough water, I think, to keep us going for what we require.
Now, going back to a topic that we touched on earlier about the beer meal, Bryony Mill in Orkney and Golspie Mill in Sutherland have got links to local farmers and niche beer meal products. Is there room for you to share a growing market, or will you aim not to compete at the same scale with them in terms of producing meal for human consumption? And just connected, somebody else has asked, what is beer meal and what is it used for?
Well, I don't think that any of you indicated the two nearest mills that work, the Bryony in Orkney and the Golspie mill, and we will not be competing with them because the business model that we have built up is very, very different. The milling that we will do will be on a very small scale. So the only people that we would be liable to supply would be very, very local, local people, perhaps a local bakery. But it's
really for demonstration purposes that we'd be milling. It's not to produce a product on a grand scale.
There is a problem you can, at the moment we are a small trust. And Bryony has driven what we're doing forward considerably. If we were to try to produce enough meal to make if we were to try to use the mill full time, you would be looking at miller full time, and we have a problem then in that you need to start thinking about reintroducing the hill dam to provide a good enough water supply, and to do that you're looking at the millions you'd require to reinstate the hill dam because of current legislation. So it's a difficult one. On a small scale we can do it.
I think there's possibly also an issue with the idea of human consumption and what you can sell as well, because I worked on a mill once for the National Trust in England, and they desperately wanted to be able to sell the flour that they were going to mill, but they couldn't get it past the environmental standards required, and so they couldn't sell it. They could only have bags of free by donation. It was perfectly good, there was nothing wrong with it, but they couldn't legally sell it, and so that became a bit of an issue for them as well. But I hope you will find your own way around all of these tricky problems.
The other question there was about what it is, beer meal, as a type of barley. But
well, beer is a form of barley that is grown in northern areas. There's a very good book written by a lady in Orkney about beer. It's used in local baking, beer bread, beer bannocks, that type of thing, if you like. If you made barley bread or barley bannocks, it would be similar, not quite the same, but similar. That's about as much as I can do by way of an answer, if you like. I'm not much of a baker myself, unfortunately.
Now we are. Let me just check the time. We've got 10 minutes left. Another technical question: will the wheel axle shaft use lignum vitae wood as a bearing, like the one at Bursey Mill in Orkney, and was used here?
Could you repeat that question?
Will the wheel axle shaft use lignum vitae wood as a bearing, like the one at Bursey Mill in Orkney?
No, the mill shaft, the wheel shaft is supported on bronze bearings, bronze shell bearings, which is basically a cup on which the shaft sits. And very often bearings come in pairs, as a top one and a bottom one. But in the mill wheel, there's only a bottom shell, and there is a metal cap goes over the top of it. But because it's heavy and relatively slow running, it only needs the bottom shell.
Okay.
But we replaced one, the outer bearing, I don't know, 30 years ago. And there's still one spare. sitting on the bench in the mill at the moment.
Now, I think I'm just checking all the questions. I think we've covered the vast majority of them. Now here's an interesting one. Was the milling seasonal? In Ayrshire, you hear of millers who were blacksmiths, for instance, between the harvests. Is that something that happened in Caithness as well?
The milling tended to be seasonal from about late September on to April, sometimes May. Mm-hmm. And that's when you'd basically finished the previous crop. And because of that, you had to store the meal over the summer, and hence the reason for the big, heavily constructed wooden gurnals. You had to pack the meal in gurnals to keep it fresh over the summer. And in the mill in John O'Groats case, John O'Groats was very much a crofting community, and the Houstons, like most other people, also had a croft, so they had all the croft work to do over the summer.
Yep.
Yeah, crops grown in the summer, and there's more water powering the mill over the winter as well. Yeah,
it all makes sense. Lots of thanks pouring in the chat. Everybody has been really pleased to hear about this project and are very excited to know more and come and visit in due course. One further question which says, I am interested in the treatment of the drying floor of the kiln. Will this functional element remain legible? In other mills, the cast iron structure there has suffered badly due to either maritime conditions or bird guano or other environmental influences. So what's the plan for the kiln?
I can speak. Do you want to say something about that, Chris?
Yeah. Some of the cast iron has perished just through use and age. And we're currently in the process. We're about to do a cast iron inspection. Historic Environment Scotland pointed us in the direction of doing that, and we will assess all the panels and reuse them in any way we can. We've allowed for a new floor, which would be similar to the one at the Bryony mill, which is would be a new grill. And it may be that we come up with some solution where we're using both the cast iron panels, but they're not actually performing as a structural element. They're just retained on site, possibly underneath the grill, and are still serviceable, or maybe there will be some other way of reusing them. But we'll try and retain as much fabric as they can. But I think definitely some of the panels are life expired, and that's just a fact of life with that material in that situation.
Thank you.
The kiln or kiln plates in the John O'Groats mill are 18-inch plates, and by tradition there was two sizes. There was 12-inch square and 18-inch square. They were cast in the local foundries in Wickenthurso, and they were a consumable in the milling industry, so they would last quite a long time, but they did wear out, and were replaced. My understanding is that they were a regular casting in the local foundries, like fire bars and such like. And if you were casting, you spent many days making up your molds, and then you would have one day of casting, and inevitably they would cast the big, expensive, complicated castings first, and the fire bars and kill plates and such like tended to get the last of the melt, if you like. So it wasn't necessarily particularly high quality cast iron that was left. There might be a certain amount of dirt in it as well. And as a miller required kill plates, he would buy probably a few each year. And that's basically how it was done. The trouble with the mill that goes out of use is that it's like an old stove. in an old house, it doesn't react well to being left with the salty atmosphere around you.
I think also the scale of the use in the future is going to be quite different from the past. So we don't have to look at it in the same way as it was used in the past, but we'll try and retain as much fabric as we can.
Now, final question, I think we have to call it. We're coming right up to the end of our time. Will there be other information about lost mills in the area? Somebody saying their mother-in-law's family were millers at Lather and Wheel. And it'd be nice to have maybe information about other mills in the area.
That's a great question, actually, because it's something we're extremely keen. Rognvald's done a little bit of research, and we've got a sort of basic understanding. But as Rognvald said in his lecture, the milling industry in Caithness was huge, and there were mills all over the place. And we want to kick off a project, hopefully at some point this year, inviting everyone across the county or people with links to the county and mills. I mean, a lot of the mills are now derelict or disappeared, or maybe they've been converted. So they've all got different histories, but absolutely, we are keen to reach out and try and get stories of each mill that was in the area, gather all the information together and produce some kind of outputs at the end. I maybe give my email address, just because if anyone does want to get in touch about either that or anything else, to be honest, milling, they're more than welcome. So my email address is b.robinson@johnogroatsmill.com. b.robinson@johnogroatsmill.com. So yeah, if anyone is interested or has memories, photos, stories of any of the other mills in Caithness at all, we'd be really, really happy to hear from you.
Well, that is a lovely point at which to end the talk. I have to say thank you all very much for attending. Particular thanks to Bryony, Rognvald and Chris for putting together such a great selection of images and information for us all to see. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. It's been lovely to have this conversation with you all, and I'm sure that we've all got John O'Groats on our list of places we simply must visit. I'm sure that everyone is planning a tour of the north now. And
can I just quickly say thank you so much, everyone, for all your positive comments. That's been lovely to see.
Yeah.
We send you all a virtual round of applause. Now, SPAB would be absolutely delighted to see you all at one of our future online lectures. There are 3 more under the theme of Milling Matters: Life Cycles of Textile Mills with Mark Watson, Dusty Mill, Dusty Miller with Carl Gravatt, and Saving of Rosefield Mills with Luke Maloney. They are coming up 1 per month between now and May. Finally, we would like to invite you all to come to our Milling Matters Scottish Mills Weekend on the 7th and 8th of May, to be held at Lower City Mills in Perth. This will be an amazing weekend of talks, tours and discussions about the future of milling in Scotland, all hosted in conjunction with Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust. Early bird tickets are available at reduced cost until the 15th of March, and all the information is on our website, so do go and have a look. So thank you once again to all our guests and hosts, and goodbye.